it's offered and it's funded.
So I want to start off by just saying hello to everyone who has come in. If you haven't seen on the screen, as women, we work really, really hard. So instead of having a question in the beginning that made you think, we wanted one that made you smile instead. So if you want to share with us any vacations you have coming up to reset and recharge, because as women, we do that. We don't do it enough. Just put it in the chat and we'll get started here really shortly, but just so happy to see everyone. And I'll turn it over to Deepika. I just want to make sure people are already doing the chat, but putting that out there.
Thanks for the reminder, Taisha. Yes, we are heading to Niagara Falls this weekend. It was a last minute trip. So want to be amazed with nature. I mean, just, we just need the reminder once in a while. And it's nice to see Jennifer Zimmerman. We just had lunch at the awesome art museum. Thanks for introducing me to that. And I think BA3 has been leading a lot of that equity and grant making, not even before that was all the rage, right? They were just not using the word. It became a rage now, but I think they were following a lot of those principles. So I see a lot of really fun vacations in Colorado, enjoying the wildflowers and wildlife. Sharon, we need that background. Send us some pictures. That sounds so awesome. Oh, heading to Canoe Bay in northern Wisconsin, Kathy. That sounds so much fun. How was the South Florida? I know you drove there, Jennifer.
We did drive there with our 3 children and we all survived and still pretty much like each other. So it was successful.
Yes. Family, I think we were talking about our kids the other day. It's like they annoy the hell out of us, but then they grow out, then they're starting walking out. I was like, wait a minute, like when did that happen? Okay, I think we have nearly 45 or 50 people registered for this event, so which is pretty awesome because we had such a short timeline. We were kind of nervous, like we didn't give people enough time to learn about it or register it. So kudos to the team for pulling it out. And we had some tech issues. The original Zoom link that we sent was not the right one, so we had to kind of get it done ASAP yesterday, in essence. So. But I guess, Kathy just returned from a week-long multi-sport adventure with my daughters and their families, Yellowstone and Tetons. Oh my gosh. It's like definitely a conversation. We need a much, much longer conversation than this one, I guess. Okay, I see a lot of familiar faces, a lot of new faces. This is so cool. Thank you everyone for joining us. And we are so excited that you all took your lunch time to learn more about what's happening in our region around equity and grant making. And we have 3 amazing, amazing speakers lined up for you. I don't want to take up too much time. Taisha, are we ready to move to the next slide? Okay. So we have a slew of upcoming events for you guys at Impact 100, especially in the equity conversations, and we also have unplug events. I will just drop a link in the chat box to our events page because you can pick and choose what you like. But we have 2 really unique series. One is around equity conversations. So this season, that really want you to take a pause.
Deepika's freezing up on
Okay.
us, is she not?
I was wondering if it was only me.
Yes.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
I think it's just Deepika.
And yeah.
Okay.
She must
All right.
maybe
Yeah, that will help
must have
Deepika
internet.
probably to turn off your video. Try again if you could.
If not, then I guess we could just drop the link for the upcoming events, or does anyone else? Oh, I can jump in too.
Yeah.
No, we can't hear you, Deepika, so sorry. So we have a couple of events coming up. July 27th, I believe. 24th, thank you.
I believe.
We have an unplugged.
Mhm.
We have an unplugged event downtown, and our nonprofit organization that will be speaking is Elements. And so we'll be looking at some murals and really just taking in the culture from downtown and walking. We also are currently in the midst of a Color of Law cohort. We had one meeting in June, but we have another one at the end of this month as well. I believe it's the 27th or 28th. And even if you didn't attend the first, we still encourage you to sign up. There is a link that has a video of the author that really kind of captures the essence of the book. So if you still want to participate in open dialogue, we had great discussion last conversation. That is great. The Black American Tree Project is an experiential experience that is happening in August, the month of August.
16th and 18th, Taisha.
16th and 8th. Thank you so much for being my co-pilot, Nancy.
Yes. Yes.
And then
Color of Cast, Isabel Wilkerson's
is in
cast.
September.
Yep, in partnership with the Mercantile Library will happen in, I believe, October and November. Right?
Yeah. So, and then we'll end the year with another equity forum that really talks about Impact 100's journey this year in equity, what our learnings were, both with a new funding source that we did as part of our 20th anniversary, which is the Next Step Award, which is a smaller award of 20,000 or less to organizations with the operating budget of 500,000 or less. So we'll talk a little bit about those learnings, and then some learnings from our, $100,000 grants process, and some things that we've done and learned, and some new things that we will be implementing next year. So there's a lot coming. We just want to kind of put the plug out there so you know what's out there. And we really encourage everyone to attend if you can and learn more about our journey, but just learn more about equity in the philanthropic space in general. Okay. So I think we'll move on to introducing the panelists. So we have a wonderful set of panelists today. I'm super excited to introduce them and to learn from them. So we have Jena Bradley. Jena Bradley is, Jena Bradley's passion exists at the intersection of racial equality, philanthropy, and storytelling. She serves as a senior manager on the community impact team at the United Way of Greater Cincinnati. And in this role, she provides leadership to several equity strategies, including the organization's Black-led social change, innovation, and Project Lift. We asked Jena, what is equity and grant? Why is equity and grant making important to our community? And Jena said, it is commonly said that those closest to the problem or challenge are likely closest to the solution. In grant making, however, these context or live experience experts are often left out of funding opportunities, as funders tend to invest in what they trust and trust what's most familiar to them. If we want to make progress against these complex problems, we have to more broadly define what we consider as expertise and invest in more equitable and accessible ways. So please join us in welcoming Jena Bradley. Rasheda Cromwell is our next panelist. And in June of 2021, Mrs. Cromwell was named Senior Director of Community Strategies for the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. And in her current role, she develops strategies for community engagement and ensures that GCF is driving impact in its commitment to address racial equity issues in our region. She is also responsible for building the strategy for GCF, GCF's unrestricted grants, and cultivating collaborative relationships with all stakeholders spanning across the nonprofit, government, and business sectors to support systemic solutions that will help our region thrive. We also asked Rasheda, why is grant making important to our community? She indicated equity in grant making is so important as we can no longer ignore the racial differences that exist in healthcare, criminal justice, educational attainment, and social economic status for African Americans, Latinos, and other communities of color. The $1 trillion philanthropic industry has incredible potential to shift these power dynamics by using grant making to empower those communities that have been traditionally excluded in the past. By focusing on equity, grant making organizations can advance the entire community for a stronger, more cohesive region for all. Please join us in welcoming Rasheda. Jennifer Zimmerman is our third panelist. Jennifer Zimmerman is the Vice President of Impact and Evaluation for BI3, Bethesda Inc.'s grant-making initiative to transform the health of all people in Greater Cincinnati. BI3 invests in innovative ideas that have the potential to lead to breakthrough change in health practices. With the goal of reducing health disparities, achieving health equity is central to BI3's mission to create a healthier community for all. We also asked Jennifer, why is equity in grant making important to our community? And her response was, equity in grant making focuses on philanthropy's internal practices, our relationships with our grantee partners, the communities that we serve, the systems and structures in which we live. It seeks to disrupt the imbalance of power and co-create transformational change to address racial disparities so that every person has equal opportunity to achieve their highest level of health and well-being, which will in turn uplift our entire community. Please join us in welcoming Jennifer. Well, I must say, just reading that, I am overwhelmed. We have some pretty amazing panelists, and I can't wait to learn more from them. So we are going to jump right into our panel discussion. So the first question that I would like to start off with, and I'll start off with Jena, is how does the United Way define equity in grant making?
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to go first. So equity in grant making it sounds like a really simple concept, but has so many elements to it. So for us as a United Way, it's recognizing that disparities exist in our community across different protected classes, including race, gender, et cetera. I don't need to go through the whole list. And when we think about equity, it's thinking about who benefits from the work that we're investing in. So who are the direct recipients of services? Who are the organizations that get investment to design those solutions? It's about who gets to make the decisions at the table around investment and the work that we focus on. So in all of those elements, it's making sure that folks whose voices are often underrepresented are at the table. So in terms of who we invest in, it's making a targeted investment in organizations and people that have that lived experience or context expertise and recognizing the value in that. When we think about who gets to make the decisions, it's broadening that power scope and bringing in community members that are connected and passionate about the issues that we're involved in to help make those decisions, and really being intentional about the populations that receive the benefit and ensuring that that work is really culturally competent to that organization. So all of these facets together come to inform our view of equity and grant making from an external standpoint, and then internally ensuring that we're holding ourselves to that same standard of having a diversity of leadership and thought and experience. So lots of things.
And it really does speak to the complexity of equity, right? It's not one thing. It's now you want to start somewhere, don't want to be so overwhelmed, but that there's a lot in the term of equity and grant making. So thank you for sharing that. So I'll go next to Rasheda. Rasheda, how does GCF define equity and grant making?
Yeah, and I was really happy to hear Jena's definition because I think GCF is very much aligned. I will just add that we really wanted to look at, you know, all the systematic barriers that do exist. So we are very intentional about investing in solutions that disrupt those systematic barriers, and also looking at those solutions that also impact communities of color. But just as Jena said, not in terms of kind of, I feel like traditionally in the past, foundations have taken very much like a savior approach, that we're coming into different communities, specifically poor communities and communities of color, and we're dictating what's best for your community and what solutions need to be made. And it's more making sure that we're not doing that, being very intentional, being very aware that we're including community members as a part of these conversations. And so that we're prioritizing organizations that are doing that work, that are making sure that they're doing community organizing, community education, that they're really taking the time to include a more systematic approach rather than we're going to come in and be the saviors of the day, and kind of not intentionally, but sometimes you replicate those same systems, unfortunately, of oppression. And so we want to be very, very careful that we don't do that. So we define grant making very similarly to the United Way, which is yay. I'm glad we're kind of all on the same page, but really looking at solutions that disrupt systematic barriers.
Thank you for that, Rasheda. And I apologize, Janae. I have known you for years and have never messed up your name, but today you were Jena. So I am so sorry. It is Janae.
Then I said it wrong. I apologize, Janae.
Because I started it, so I have to fix it now. I'm so sorry, Janae.
Not a problem.
So Jennifer, how does BI3 define equity and grant making?
Great, thank you. And thank you for the invitation just to share our journey, because we very much think about this as a journey and that we're learning all along the way, and we are making mistakes, but we are continuing to learn as we move forward. And so, you know, I think for Janae and Rasheda, they have very well defined the work, and we're certainly very aligned. And I think one of the key things that they have said is that it's really about moving philanthropy from the center to having the people in the community and most impacted by these issues to the center of the work, right? Like we're, as philanthropy, we are not the experts. And so really moving ourselves out of the middle to the side, to that supportive role. And so I think for us, we really think about the unequal distribution of resources and opportunities and how we can play a role in addressing that, particularly for specific communities, because we know from zip code to zip code that the abundance and quality of those resources really vary. And so what is the role that we can play to impact the health and well-being of everyone in our community?
I would say, in building on everything that we said, and it's probably implied, that we flip the frame, and instead of this conversation of this race to the bottom of here are all of these downtrodden communities that have had access to limited resources, really thinking about it from an asset-based approach and say we have so many people in our communities that have a varying level of expertise that if we're able to redistribute our power, our resources, we can support them in building this community where everyone has an opportunity to thrive. So in discussing how power shows up, it's also reframing the context that it's not always this negative race to the bottom that often you see in philanthropic spaces.
Yeah.
Janae, I can just like close the book, we can end it, and we can just, because I think that at the end of the day is the crux of
Jenny, can you, Taisha, can we take a moment to talk about what race to the bottom? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, sure.
Just distinguish the asset-based versus the race to the bottom for us a little bit.
So I think if we look at traditional philanthropy, let's use a grant application as an example. When you're talking about the work that you're trying to do, instead of framing it as an opportunity to say, here's the challenge that exists, here are all of the strengths and opportunities we have to address that challenge, it's this narrative of oh my goodness, these communities don't have anything. And if only someone would come in to save them, they would be better off. And we can be those saviors for that community. So it's been this framing of make the challenge, frame it in the worst way possible so that folks will be more encouraged to want to take part or invest in it, which does a disservice to all of the folks that have been doing work in the community for decades and centuries, and does a disservice to the communities themselves. So flipping that frame and really seeing how powerful those narratives are.
Yes, very true. Thank you, Jena. Sorry, Taisha.
Yeah, thank you for framing it. I was, what I was gonna say is that is spot on. And I think that when you talk about DEI work anywhere, even when I've talked about it at work, when do we start seeing differences as assets, right? Not as, oh, well, we have to do this because it's the right thing to do, because they need us to do this for them in order for them to thrive, right? Whoever the them is. And so I think you just bring up a really valuable point that even in my experience of coaching, people are whole when they come to me as a coach. Communities are whole. They're not perfect, but they're whole. They have everything in them they need to thrive. And every community needs different things in order to make that happen. What we're talking about is how do we invest in the communities that just need the financial investment? It doesn't mean they don't have the people within the community to make it happen. They just may need some more of the financial support, or they may need a resource to help them kind of navigate how to build capacity, right? So it's really leaning into that and not seeing it as a deficit. So I think that was so beautiful how you said that, because I feel like I have that conversation way more than not, where we often tend to go to the issue and say we have to fix it, as opposed to really understanding the solution to fix it is within the issue itself and those who are managing that, right? They already have it. They just need the investment to make it happen. So that was super deep. Thank you so much for even going there.
I quickly want to add too, I think an important part of what Greater Cincinnati Foundation does is making sure that people understand it's not a zero-sum game. So because some communities of color are empowered or given a voice doesn't mean that others lose. It's to the benefit of the entire community. And I think that's really, really important for people to understand, to get away from this us, them dichotomy that sometimes can exist, is that you're really kind of unlocking the full potential of the entire community. And that actually, and there's all sorts of studies and data that shows that economically benefits the entire community when you have everyone actually thriving together and wholly. And so I think that while not a part of our definition, that's important in the messaging of why equity and grant making matters. I mean, it's not just about certain subgroups, it's actually about the entire community.
Thank you for adding that. That is, yes, the jewels are dropping, all of it. So thank you for adding to that. Lisa, you had a question really quick?
Yes, maybe just to continue to drive home for all of us, starting with me, the implication of race to the bottom versus asset-based thinking. So what's the outfall of this race to the bottom thinking that might be well-intentioned but not understood? And what is it, when you say flip the frame, what's the impact or the positive benefit that happens from flip the frame? Because I don't think we all get it. So I'll start with me. I want to understand the so what of continuing to think this race to the bottom thought, and how does that hurt what we think we're doing philanthropically?
Great question. Anyone on the panel want to respond or go first? I'm sure everyone.
Well, I think, I don't know that I can respond directly to Lisa's question, but maybe we'll get closer. So one of the things that, we keep thinking about is that as we look at the move towards equity, that a lot of that is grounded, and I think Rasheda said that earlier, is that it's really about changing the systems and structures that are getting in the way of communities completely leveraging their resilience and opportunities, right? And so it's thinking about what are those structural things that are getting in the way, rather than focusing on the the specific outcomes or data or needs that are manifest in individuals or in communities, that those are actually the result of systems that are not functioning for everyone in our community.
Got it. Thank you. That was a great example. That helps me a lot.
And I'll just add another example. Prior to my start with Greater Cincinnati Foundation, I've always been a fundraiser, and I felt the need in my grant applications to prove more and more need. So instead of being asset-based, I felt the need to say we're feeding more and more hungry kids. The problem's getting worse and worse. And I felt like that was the compelling argument. And if you really look at that, if you stand back and kind of look at the big picture, it's like, why are we encouraging not-for-profits and communities to have more hunger or more kids who are falling behind in proficiency levels? Why are we setting that up as the benchmarks of more desperation almost? I would call that the race to the bottom, and we're continuously funding those same solutions that are clearly not working because we're coming back to the funder every year and saying, actually, I have more need than what I had last year. Look how much worse things are getting. So that to me is an example of a race to the bottom, where ideally, right, you would be programming yourself out of, which I know that sounds bad, but in the long term, in a very big picture, you want your community to improve every year. You don't want to say we have more and more hunger here in our community, so therefore we need more money for more meals. And so it's just kind of changing that to be more solutions oriented. We're actually showing improvements of your community, and that is the case for support. And that's what you present to funders rather than showing our community is getting worse and worse. And so that's what I call flipping that narrative.
That is so great. That's great, Rasheda. And for all of the participants, you can add any questions in the chat. We'll get to a Q&A part. We just have like 4 other questions, I promise. Not a ton. We will definitely get to everyone's questions, but Lisa, that question needed to be asked now because I think that is really great in kind of framing the rest of the conversation. So thank you so much for asking a question many people may not have wanted to ask, but that's essentially what we're here for, to really truly understand, like, why is this important and how do we move forward? So thank you for that. So I'm going to go to the next. Janae, did you want to add anything to that, or you think we're good? Okay, so the next question is, so in your organization, what was the turning point? So when did you realize or decide, like, we need to do something different here? You know, we're not exactly hitting the mark and we need to pivot. So I think we started with Janae. Rasheda, if you would like to start.
Oh, I was so hoping that you wouldn't call on me for this one, only because I've only been with the organization for a month. So a lot of the turning points, a lot of the work, I've been very fortunate to start with an organization that kind of walked in the door by nature of my position and what I've been hired to do. I mean, they are ready. They've been doing this work for years. The equity journey, I believe, for GCF has been a very, very long journey. I think there's sometimes some worry and some hesitation on the receptivity of donors in the community at large and how do we message this. So it's been like a very, very slow journey. And I feel like given the recent events of 2020, which I think we're all kind of just reeling from the pandemic, just the crisis in every way that our country has been in, has really decided to be more vocal about the work that they've been working on for so long in this equity journey. So I think I'm walking in the door a little bit different, probably from the other organizations, in that it's a breath of fresh air to me because the organization has already kind of made that turning point, if that makes sense. I can personally speak to what my turning point has been working in the not-for-profit sector and philanthropy. And I think mine was a few years ago, back in, it's around 2014, when Cincinnati started making national news in a very negative way for the childhood poverty rates. And it was coming out that Cincinnati, over half the children in Cincinnati are growing up in poverty. And we're, the largest poverty rates in the nation. And at that moment, there were all sorts of coalitions and collaboratives formed around what should we do? How do we fix this? And I again saw us doubling down on programs that weren't necessarily successful in the first place. And then I started to look at the room and wonder who has a voice at the table. And I would often see myself as the only person of color in a room of dozens of people talking about the solutions for communities of color. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense either. And so I think that was the turning point for myself and my equity journey to learn more, to do more. I started attending trainings on my own, reading more, and really looking at how do we shift this narrative so we're actually making an impact and we're not just continuously spinning our wheels, right? All with good intention and everyone working so hard towards the same projects and the same programs that are clearly not working for our communities. And so that was my turning point. But I think GCF has been on this journey for a while.
Thank you. I'm going out to Jennifer. Jennifer, what was the turning point for BI3?
Sure. So we have always focused on addressing health disparities, eliminating health disparities, and we know that in order to do that, we need to work towards equity. And I think one of the places where we've had the most learning and the most opportunity and has really kind of spurred us forward is we have done a lot of work in the maternal and infant health space, particularly focusing on infant mortality. And so about 10 years ago, we had multiple proposals come to us to address infant mortality specific in Avondale, a community that had one of the highest infant mortality rates in the state, if not the country. And so the approach so with those multiple proposals, we actually invited them to work together and create a collaborative approach. And where that approach ended up going was, let's go to the people that live in that community and ask them what they need. What are the solutions? And so really started building a model of care around moms and what they said they needed. And there was so much power in that in terms of shifting how healthcare systems, how social service providers, how the community thought about what was needed to really tackle this infant mortality issue, and saw amazing success in Avondale. And so since then has also brought it into the larger community and looking at how can healthcare systems replicate this model? How can we reach this model further out into other communities? And as a result, we've seen in 2020 one of the lowest infant mortality rates in history for Hamilton County. And really grounding that in the knowledge of particularly Black women in the community under the leadership of Queens Village, which has been a very vocal group of women to say, this is what we need, this is the support. And so for us as a funder, really learning how to step to the side and say, if that's what you need, what are the resources you need to get it done? And so really supporting that work moving forward. And so what that's done is really left us hungry to do more of that. And so that's kind of how we are starting to grow in our journey and thinking about how we apply that in other areas of funding for us.
Thank you for that. And thanks for the hard work. I mean, coming from Children's Hospital, you know, we're one of the best in the country, yet we're number 5 for child poverty is like, and the health disparity, it's just heartbreaking. And so it's just, it's a prime example of where you could still have the best and still not get the outcomes, right? In your own backyard, you're not getting those outcomes. So Janae, how did United Way turn the corner?
Yeah, this feels like a bit of a cop-out answer, but I don't think for our organization, I don't think there has been one specific turning point. I think it's been a series of inflection points for us. So for us as an organization, we've long been committed to continuous learning and improvement. And I think as things rise to the surface or as we dig into issues, we think about what's our opportunity to do work better. So to give a specific example, with the Black-led social change initiative that I lead up, we were at a point where we were making our multi-year investment decisions, and it became apparent to me that we have lots of organizations doing amazing work in our community, and we are so grateful in Greater Cincinnati to not have this shortage of caring individuals that want to see our community thrive and grow. And what I was seeing is that as we look at new partners coming into the pipeline, there weren't a lot of leaders, Black leaders in these grassroots organizations that were coming to us at all. And so I took it upon myself to explore why that was. So have conversations with Black social change makers, whether they're connected to nonprofit organizations or other structures, to say, what's your experience or interpretation of United Way, and lifted up this series of opportunity spaces that we carry forward in our conversation, so that visibility and connection piece, the valuing people over paperwork piece, and how do we not default to a well-written grant application or a well-written anything being the marker for quality and the sole marker for quality, the piece around coaching leaders to success and recognizing that even in this space, like a lot of systems, there are these unwritten rules that help people and organizations and change makers to navigate that not everyone has access to. And then that last piece around being willing to have courageous conversations about race. So it often comes from recognizing a challenge that exists, digging deeper into that challenge and saying, what can we do differently as an organization, internally and externally, to address it? I think both Jennifer and Rasheda really hit the nail on the head, that it's this constant evolution and knowing that there are going to be points where it's going to feel like you're in the wrong space and say, all right, let's pivot, or I'm not doing enough in this space, and say, okay, where do we have space to do more? So it's been this collection, this constellation of realizations and some of the changes that are happening at the national level in philanthropy that have encouraged us to be able to make the changes that we're making as an org.
Thank you for that. And just to tell like a brief story, I was selected as one of the Black Empowerment Works reviewers. And I remember during the training, one of the things that was brought up was the importance of not giving into the tendency to disqualify application because of spelling errors. And it was so interesting to me because, for one, it's nothing I ever think about, but it is so subconscious in who I am, right? Because you are told when you write a resume, which is on an individual level, the most publicly looked upon, sheet, it's one or two errors and you're out. And just having the space to be aware, like, not everyone has a grant writer that's gonna like have this to perfection. Some people are doing this while running the program, while raising children, while creating and building partnerships. And do we want to make a decision based on, this subconscious view that because they have spelling errors, it's not a good application or it's not a good organization? And that was something it just never dawned on me that that's a potential bias that I probably act on that I didn't even think about. So it was very interesting just being part of that training and just calling out certain things you would take for granted or think, you're not even thinking that you think that way, but it's just so natural. So thank you for sharing that. All right.
You're on mute.
Sorry, the next question I'd like to ask is starting with Jennifer is, with recent conversations regarding philanthropy focusing more on shifting the power dynamic. So I think this goes a little bit back to like the not racing to the bottom. How has this become a factor when evaluating your own processes?
Yeah, and I think Janae started to kind of touch on that, is we're looking at what are some of the barriers that we create as part of our process that immediately takes certain folks or groups or organizations out of it, right? And so I think just as an example, we did a capacity building RFP in the fall, where we really we heard from the community during the pandemic that organizations were really struggling to connect with the community and to connect with services because as the shift to virtual, right? The organizations did not have telehealth or computers or webcams, and then the people in the community did not have access to those things to get back into services. And so, one of the things that we wanted to do was to prioritize organizations that were really tied into the community. And so we really looked at, what does our application look like? We streamlined it down to 4 questions. We did not require it to go through our online grant system. because that's a whole process in and of itself. We really put ourselves out there in terms of being available for questions if organizations had questions about the process. And so really trying to look at how do we eliminate some of those barriers that are just part of regular philanthropic process that may stand in the way of organizations getting to us. And I think Janae also hit on like that we, as a philanthropy, we have a certain subset of organizations that know us, that we have relationships with. And so how do we expand our circle? How do we expand our network? And so we were really fortunate to lean into organizations like All in Cincinnati, I see Denisha there, to help us promote that opportunity to groups that we might not have relationships with. And so I think one of the things that we were really excited about is of the 37 organizations that we awarded those grants to, only 7 had been previous grantees to us. So the rest were all new and were new relationships. And so we were really excited by this idea of how do we reach out to different groups, streamline the process in a way that makes it more accessible and open to different organizations that we wouldn't connect with.
Okay, Rasheda?
Yeah, I'm happy to follow Jennifer because Greater Cincinnati Foundation did similar work. We have qualified that in what we call a community leadership framework, but really changed the application process to make ourselves more accessible, to answer questions, and then just taking away that even lengthy online application process has been huge. And also an inquiry portal previously. Again, I can't take credit for this since I'm new with the organization, but a lot of the grant making relied upon relationships. So if you knew how to navigate the system, you knew how to get to the right program officer, you were able to build a relationship with them, you kind of knew how to work the system, your application would rise to the top just because it's more visible. And so really getting away from that, we have a more open inquiry portal at any time of the year, and it doesn't have to be a formalized, perfect, well-worded application. You can submit your ideas and your projects in this one kind of hub space, and someone from our office will contact you. It's been a lot of work. I know it's been very intense for us to respond to everyone, but that is the goal. And not only to respond with some sort of email, but really take the time to even pick up the phone, to have conversations. If your application is not necessarily quote unquote ready or competitive yet, how do you get there? Providing feedback and suggestions on that. And then prior to, during every RFP cycle, we now have the ability to train those before applying. So you kind of know what to expect, what these questions are really trying to get at. And training may be the wrong word, but an orientation, if you will, for interested applicants before they apply. So they are prepared and they feel like they really know what they should be targeting. And beyond that, we've specifically allocated dollars for racial equity work. So I'm very, very, very proud of that at Greater Cincinnati Foundation. It's roughly around upwards to $6 million a year specifically dedicated to those grants that are specifically addressing racial equity. And we've even narrowed it down from there, really looking at economic mobility, specifically among Black women, also looking at affordable housing and racial and social justice. So that is something that is newer to our organization. We are still kind of fine-tuning all the details and our metrics and processes in place. But right now we're really looking the community, again, with turning it that philanthropy is not the center, the community is the center of these conversations, for people to tell us what works best for the community, and it doesn't necessarily have to fit in this perfectly worded application.
Janae, how does it work at United Way?
There's something so beautiful about going third in this like absolutely dope panel of women, is that I could just say ditto, right? So in this space, if we're talking specifically about making grants, it's not rocket science, right? So in the process, we think about entry and awareness to start. So how do people get into the process and how are they aware that the process exists? So it's figuring out who you connect to and what reach that entity has. It's about application and eligibility. So being really clear about what you're looking for and make the application process as simple as possible for us. That includes thinking about the language that we use and how accessible that language is, and being available. So sort of to what Rasheda was saying, in our current Black Empowerment Works program, we have the opportunity for people to call us, email us, sign up for a video chat. I have availability not only Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 4:30. I have availability in the evening going until 7 p.m. and on weekends, because not everyone is existing in this space full time. So it's trying to reach people at the times that work for them. It's about review. So how do you make decisions and what considerations are you making when you make decisions? Selection, and then post-selection support. So it only gets you so far to say, I want to invest differently in organizations. If you're not also looking to say, how do we support organizations along their journey and also create spaces where they can lift up their expertise? So ditto to what's been said about how do we fade into the background a little bit and make sure that there's space for people to lead. So these people are wonderful. I don't need to say any more on this question.
Yes, this is an amazing panel. I'm really enjoying all the insight. I'm sure many of us are having so many enlightening moments. So Impact 100 is one of the things we ask in Impact 100 is this transformational? For us, that is one of the hills we essentially die on, right? That's a core value of who we are. How are we transforming by making this investment? And so just wanted to ask, and we'll start with Jena, how have you seen transformation happen in this journey to equity? And if you want to use a story to answer that question, just to display it, fine. If you just want to talk about a process difference and what the outcome was, however you want to describe that transformation for you all. We just would love to get some insight on how has this really made things different in the community.
Transformation is such a big word that I think means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And in this conversation, I've talked a lot about our Black Empowerment Works program, but we've also done a lot of really dope work around connecting to faith-based communities, around using our name and our resources to make it easier for smaller organizations to access other folks' funds, especially public dollars. And so I could think about transformation a lot of different ways. If we're talking about long-term transformation, I feel it's a little too soon to tell, and we'll see over time. But the transformation that really energizes me to come into work every day is supporting someone in achieving something that they always knew that they could do, but didn't have the opportunity to do it. So some of my favorite calls are when organizations like Hodge EDU says, we want to do this education program in this school. We want to help Black boys in math and in reading. And we think we have what it takes because people counted me out when I was younger and tried to put me on that path, the remediation path. And so I want to go in and make this difference, and getting to connect with Larry and Shantae quarterly. And they're telling stories of like, we built this community where the boys get to be leaders and they're really scoring higher on their AIRS tests, and you see that light shine in their eyes, and it's just enabling them to do the work and tap into the skills that they always had. That's the stuff that makes me excited. It's seeing folks be able to gain access to employment or other resources. It's seeing folks utilizing their voice at local and state and national levels. It's about seeing our folks tap into those conversations with systems change leaders, with policy leaders, to say, these are the changes we need to make our system more equitable. So that's transformation to me, is being able to diversify who we consider to be experts and expand that table. So I'm really excited. And I think that transformation is both individual and systems.
Nice. Thank you so much, Janae. Rasheda?
Yeah, so I guess I'll do it more through storytelling. Because I was wowed, I was blown away by this grant award myself. So when the pandemic hit, Cincinnati Public Schools lost track of a lot of its students, and it was a lot of learning loss. And it was sad. I'll just put it that way. It was sad to have achieving students who they did not hear from. They didn't know what was going on. They were missing instruction. And I was very, very proud of Greater Cincinnati Foundation and taking an equitable approach to this. And let me explain. And this, I think, illustrates the difference between equity and equality. So in their mind, they were like, well, we provided everyone with a Chromebook. We provided everyone with a computer. We don't know why some students are logging on and why some students are not. So we really began diving deep and looking at what is really going on, talking to different families, parents, what's the situation, what is happening here? And a lot of students just did not have access to internet. And this is something that, again, you just we all have our own privileges, right? I would take for granted, my household has internet, my kids are able to access it. Is kind of the last thing on my mind. So Greater Cincinnati Foundation, GCF, along with Cincinnati Bell and Cincinnati Public Schools worked together to make a large investment to provide free internet access to 7,000 households. And the payoff from that and the response and reports that we received from Cincinnati Public Schools was phenomenal. It provided students with 494,000 days of instruction who were previously unable to log on. And so it was just such a game changer for education locally. And I think it really speaks to the difference between equality and equity. You know, you're giving everyone the same things on your mind, right? You're treating everyone equally, but it might not be that everyone doesn't need the same thing, doesn't have the same needs. And so really diving deep, looking into that, coming up with a solution, and really taking an equitable approach to learning through the pandemic, provided quality education for so many students and so many households locally. And the name of that big initiative program was Connect Our Students.
What a great example. Thank you so much for sharing that. Jennifer, take us home.
I appreciate that. I mean, I already shared the example of our infant mortality work. I mean, really for us, it's about seeing the power of having communities drive strategy and the direction that we move forward to get to more impactful outcomes. And, you know, it has really opened our eyes to the potential and the possibility of really forming relationships with community and shifting away from our traditional approach. And I think, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about, you know, we really see this approach in equity work as being very tied to our approach around trust-based philanthropy and how so much of this is grounded in relationship. And being humble and learning. And I think, you know, particularly in my role in a foundation and also being a white woman and knowing that my experience and background is very different than a lot of the communities that we work with, is how do we really form those trusted relationships and be a good listener and really recognize the power and the potential and the resilience of communities and build from there. So, you know, we really see kind of this equity work and trust-based philanthropy going hand in hand in the work moving forward.
So Jennifer, that is a great segue into some of the questions we've had in the chat. One of Sharon Mitchell, who is one of our co-presidents, she asked, in your infant mortality example, could you comment on what some of the interventions were that were identified with the community and what support did they identify that they needed?
Yeah, and I provided a little text response to that as well. So happy to provide more detail, but really it was, you know, what are the solutions that the women in the community were asking for? Because we recognize that the infant mortality crisis is really a Black infant mortality crisis. And so how do we listen to Black families and what they need and support that work moving forward? And so that included things like activities in the community and also looking at new programs that could address some of the barriers that were standing in the way and providing support to those communities to continue to build their own solutions.
Okay, thank you for indulging me. I'm trying to go through this chat and it is firing up. So I'm trying to catch everything that's on here. But another question by one of our Impact 100 members, Barb, is how do you reach out to communities? What is available to how do you reach out to communities to inform them on what is available for them to apply for? Community council meetings, local organizations, like how do you create the outreach to tap into a diverse subset of organizations?
I'm happy to jump in to give an example, right? So for the Black Empowerment Works program, we had a group of community leaders that designed that program from the ground up. And one part of it was us pulling together a list of community influencers and organizations that they were tied to. And it started with them leveraging their relationships and connections and trust to build the inroads. And for me, establishing relationships and trust with our champions, our community leaders that designed this program from the start. I think a little bit about it is showing up as your authentic self. So finding those avenues that exist, like community council meetings, and sort of taking off that hat of, I am this buttoned up professional that knows all of the answers to all of the questions, and you should come to me for my expertise, and coming in with a space of humility to say, hey, we don't know each other, but I think we should connect. So each year, this is our second year of running that program, we collect in the application, like, how did you hear about this? And where we see organizations that sort of rise up to the surface multiple times, we intentionally reach out to them to say, okay, we heard that you heard about this program. Let's make sure that you hear about it directly from us so that we can build that network of leaders. So a lot of it is, right, relationships, reaching out intentionally to folks that have different connections in community, and then working to build those connections based on trust and mutual respect. But yeah, a lot of community councils, a lot of organizations like All in Cincinnati, Public Allies, those known community leaders, those aspiring community leaders. Queens Village is probably one of my favorite communities on Facebook ever. And so it's just tapping into those places or finding people that know them.
Great. Does anyone else want to add to that, Jennifer or Rasheda?
I just want to provide our link to our inquiry portal that I mentioned previously in the chat, because I know funding is a real thing. No money, no mission. So it's hard to make progress if you don't have the resources that you need. And so this inquiry portal is useful in the way that you don't have to have a fully formulated application, as I mentioned before, but you might have a program or a project and you're not sure where to start. Even if GCF can't provide funding, we can also direct you to some possible resources out in the community that might be a better fit, or GCF might be the right fit. So let me at least put that link in the chat. And then I'm going to quickly put in a plug for our Racial Equity Matters that Bethesda has also sponsored, GCF sponsors as well. I think if you're just looking to understand the equity work more, really wanting to know where to start, it's a great program or training, or I don't know how to put it, webinar to go through. And it kind of there's some stair steps involved. So you don't have to be an expert in equity. There is a very much an introductory level ground router training. And then it kind of takes you through a phase 1 and phase 2. And at each step of those, we now have resources. If you're wondering, okay, what do I do next? How do I get deeper involved? You will also learn, which is a new addition to REM, at those trainings as well. So I highly recommend that. And while we're continuing on, I'll make sure to drop that information in the chat as well.
Okay, thank you so much. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. I just want to be sure there's no other questions.
One more question. Does GCF BI3 plan to continue the groundwater training in 2022? 2021 is all sold out, apparently. So they sell out quickly, people. Like, I think the registration goes live and in 10 minutes, 1,000 seats are booked out or something crazy like that.
Yes, we are absolutely committed to continue. GCF is in 2022. It's normally a very expensive endeavor, and it sells out so quickly because thanks to the generosity of a few folks I see on this call as well, we're able to sponsor that. So it's completely free. It's a training that's completely free to everyone.
And I think many of us have taken it. And so for those who haven't, highly recommend it. it is a game changer. It'll make you think about a lot of different things very differently. So, but it is worth it. It is an investment in understanding community and how we can undo some of the things we may not have intentionally created, but they are there and we need to dismantle them. So,
Taisha, we have one more question in the chat. Do we have time for one more question?
one quick question, and then we'll probably do the breakouts.
Okay. So the question from Kathy Thornton is, how have each of your organization addressed the challenge of messaging to the donors? And I think Rasheda or somebody mentioned that with the part of it is you had to educate your donors and kind of like take a stand on this issue. So how did each of you do that?
Yeah, and that's really about meeting people where they are. And so sometimes because we're so close to the work, I feel like we jump in with all these words and all this language and talking about systematic change, and the donors are like, what? And also with that, I feel like sometimes you're implying, if you're in a position of power, or you're affluent, or you're wealthy, you have to recognize the feelings that might come from that. People feel a sense of guilt sometimes, or people are even afraid of saying the wrong things or doing the wrong things, or no one wants to be labeled as a racist. And I feel like that is a very real feeling that you should start by acknowledging. That you should acknowledge with your donors, with your community at large, that this is not going to be some perfectly formulated thing, and that is okay. The messiness that's involved in the equity work is okay. So I highly recommend being upfront with your donors, sharing those reluctant feelings that people may have, acknowledging that this, although we kind of talk about it in a very systematic, distant sort of way, it's also very personal. Racism, equity, all these issues hit us all different ways, because it's very personal, and we bring different lenses and different experiences to the table. And I feel like you need to start conversations by recognizing that feeling and recognizing the awkwardness and recognizing the fear, to allow your donors to put their guards down and not to think of it as something, well, this doesn't really apply to me. Why should I care? What does this really have to do with me? And I feel like if you break down that bridge, you start there. That's extremely important. And then establishing some shared language, which usually is done internally with your organization, to make sure everyone internally is actually saying the same things and has the right messaging. And that when you're saying equity to me might be something different than when you say it to someone else. And then also being very, very careful in the way you message it, in terms of equity has almost become like, and I hate to say this, a buzzword, because we're hearing it so much and so often that I think in a way it kind of takes away the true power of what that means. And so I think it's really, really important up front to be careful about your messaging and even describing what you mean by equity, so it doesn't fall on deaf ears where a donor would say, oh my goodness, here we go again with this buzzword that I've heard a million times. You want to connect it in a way that actually resonates and is meaningful for them as well.
Such great insight. Thank you so much. This panel has been so amazing. I couldn't thank you enough for your insights. We're going to go into breakout rooms. So panelists, we still want you to be in the breakout rooms. But Sarah Grace, if you want to pull up the questions, there's just 2 questions. We've got about 10 minutes that we're just going to talk through. One is what's resonating, right? What's coming out of this discussion with the panel, and then what ideas are coming to mind as we are thinking about our own grant making. And don't think about our existing process, just it's like a brainstorm thing. So think of it that way, right? We don't want to start saying, well, we can't do that because of this, because of that. We really encourage everybody to just, what ideas are coming to mind, even if it sounds far-fetched, because every single breakout room is going to have note taker. They're just going to take the notes. So if everyone wants to take a quick picture of these 2 questions, it's going to be just organic dialogue. But they'll take little notes and we'll put it together, and it'll be a great way for us in the DEI committee and within the board to really start looking at what are we thinking, what's important to us as donors and members and operation for, Impact 100. It all connects. And so we really would love to hear your insights and feedback. So with that said, Sarah Grace, if you can get us all to the breakout rooms. It'll be 10 minutes because we went a little over. So we'll be back in about 10 minutes and then we'll close out for the day. Thank you so much. Hey, well, I hope that, oh, sorry. I hope everyone had good discussion and dialogue. I know this goes by so fast. We always say an hour and a half, we've got to fill it and then we go over. I mean, it always, but I again want to go back to Jennifer, Jena, and Rasheda. Thank you for helping to build space for us to really engage in this dialogue and do so with friends, because we are on a journey. This is not something that we know we're going to change overnight, but just having friends is important. And so we thank you for that. And we thank you for your vulnerability. And I'm sorry, I'm turning it now over to Sharon and Anne-Marie to do our closing remarks so we can end our time today.
Great. Thank you, Taisha. I am Anne-Marie Henkel and one of the co-presidents this year of Impact 100. So again, I just want to echo Taisha's thanks to Jena, Jennifer, and Rasheda. It was a great conversation today, really enlightening, a lot of learnings, but especially I want to thank Taisha and Deepika for coordinating this. This has been really, this year we've been fortunate. This is our second forum, or third forum, is it? Where we've really, second forum to really dig into and kind of reflect on the learning. So we really appreciate it. And I think in our breakout session, we talked about a lot of the key comment was, this is a journey, and recognizing we are on a journey. And that's the most important thing as an organization, to see what things we can do going forward and embrace, and which ways do we change or pivot to make us a better organization and more equity focused. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sharon.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. So I'm Sharon, the other co-president of Impact 100. And in addition to thanking our organizers and our panelists, I mean, I just want to add my thanks. It was awesome. I would just add that as part of our journey, many of you know, we had an opportunity this year to do the Next Step Awards as part of our 20th anniversary. And they have been a wonderful opportunity for us to put into practice some of our early learning on equity and grant making. The points that the panelists made about expanding our circle, I mean, they were a great opportunity there. We had 50 applicants and almost all of them were new to Impact 100. So it was a great way to get to know some of the smaller organizations in the community that are so creative and innovative. It also gave us an opportunity to streamline our process. We got that application, way down to a much smaller, easier one, we hope. And it did give us an opportunity to look at applicants that were trying to disrupt systemic barriers. We saw a lot of those in the applicants. So as everyone else said, it's a journey, and we know we are early on in the journey, but we're just delighted to be on the journey and to realize there is one to be on. And to move forward. So as we get an opportunity to distill all the comments that people offered for what we do moving forward, we'll get a chance to implement those. So thank you.
With that, it concludes our event for today. Jena and Rasheda and Jennifer, we will be in touch because we need mentors in all of this work. And I want to give a shout out to Denisha Porter from GCF. Hi, Denisha. Thank you so much for coming to support us. We'll be leaning on you as well. It's just good to know we're not alone in this, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.